Welcome back to the Middle of Culture. I am one of your co-hosts, Peter.
And I am your other host, Eden.
Eden, how have you been?
You know, are you familiar with the social media post, Boss the Fascism?
I am not.
Well, I'm going to read it to you because you need to enjoy it in its entirety. It is a Tumblr post. And it says, me, I don't get it. I thought I was doing a lot better than I was a few years ago. I'm like 10 times more on top of things than I used to be. How does everything feel terrible now? The tiny me in OSHA-approved high-vis gear that lives in my brain and pulls all the levers. Boss, it's the fascism. You're completely gunked up with cortisol due to the fact your entire daily life is now underscored with the haunting awareness of the rapid erosion of your rights, dignity, and any and all social safety nets, and you're also bearing witness to the most vulnerable people immediately being persecuted. This creates a natural stress response that basically means you're going to continue having memory and organizational problems as well as emotional imbalances. Me. But I have a bullet journal and I meditate now. Tiny OSHA me. Boss, the fascism. And that's life these days.
Yes, it is. Sadly.
How you doing?
I mean, that sounds pretty accurate. And maybe that's what I'll just fall back on because I feel exactly like that. I'm like, okay, I'm doing all these things. I'm journaling in the morning and night, and I'm exercising regularly, and I've been much more careful about what I eat, and I feel like dog shit. I'm so tired and so just constantly asking myself, why do you feel so overwhelmed all the time? And that might be it right there.
Boss,
but hey,
the fascism.
That's just it's a light way for us to kick off what will certainly be an extremely light and uplifting session.
Oh, we're definitely not talking about a fairly sad, somber thing as our main event today.
No,
definitely
not at all. No. It's just going to be a laugh a minute with me. But hey, what you been checking out lately? Anything you wanted to bring up for us?
Sure, I got a few things I can shout out. One of the first things I'll mention, it's time for our now recurring segment, the Adachi and Shimamura check-in moment.
Yep,
because I have continued to chip away. So I'm halfway through Volume 8 at this point. I think the last thing I mentioned was the end of Volume 6 where it ended with them saying, I guess we'll date. Big things have happened in Volume 7. Shimamura kissed Adachi on the forehead 2 times.
Whoa.
2 forehead kisses. So we are moving with a clip heretofore unseen.
There you go.
But here's the interesting part. Volume 8 then opened with an 80-page discursive flash forward to when they are 27, having lived together for years at this point, and just have a simple domesticity between the two of them, and they're going on their first international trip together. But before they go, Shimamura goes home to visit her family while Adachi stays back and finishes things up at their apartment. And it was just this really wild peek at the future that is going to happen, but that we're not there yet. They're going to work it out. They're going to live together. They're going to be domestic partners. They're going to be, for all intents and purposes, married. But at this point, 2 forehead kisses. That's all we've gotten.
At least that's progress.
Progress is being made. True. Let's see. What are some other things worth mentioning? I haven't really been playing any video games because I think, again, it's the fascism. I'm having trouble getting interested in anything. I have tried to pick away at a lot of different things, and I've installed a bunch of different stuff that I just had farting around in my library, played for a couple hours, and then been I don't have the bandwidth for this right now. So I was maybe I'll play a farming sim. I like farming sims. So I reinstalled Sunhaven, which I haven't played for a few years. And I played an hour and a half, and then I was I don't feel like farm simming right now. And so then I wanted to play a really well-regarded indie game. So I downloaded Paradise Killer because I know someone who says it's one of their very, very favorite games. And I was okay, I'll play Paradise Killer. And I played 3 or 4 hours, and then I was I'm just kind of bored. It's not grabbing me the way I'd hoped. And then I was okay, some people say Shenmue is the greatest game ever made. It's time to finally try Shenmue. And I booted up Shenmue, and let me tell you, the opening cutscene for Shenmue is one of the most incredible things I've ever seen in a video game. It was so cool, so moody, had such interesting shots. Like, I feel like, especially when it comes to cinematics in video games, for better or for worse, BioWare's popularity has resulted in a lot of similar like shots in video games, lots of similar cutscenes,
sure.
Which are a lot of like mid-shot faces, two cuts, you know, like back and forth between two people kind of looking at each other. And it's not bad, but it does feel a little heavy sometimes. There's too much of it in the realm of video games. This just looks like a Yakuza movie. Like, it looks like a crime movie from the late 90s, which is when this game was made. It was so cool and so stylish. And then I started playing the actual game, and I was like, oh yeah, it's a life sim. I have to go around and get a job and earn money and do all of these things and talk to all these people. That seems so cool, but I don't think I have the juice for that right now. So I'm not also playing Shenmue. So
okay.
No video games. I'm just like, I want to play video games, but I feel like I'm getting burnt out on the daily games that I play. I don't know, man. It's just rough out here. It's just rough out here.
It's rough.
And then one thing I will mention that is not so much pop culture-y, but like is in the realm of culture overall. I have started trying to like relax more in the afternoons, because I feel like I start the day with like, you know, I have a coffee and I try to do like a metta meditation while I wait for the coffee to brew, just to like try to, you know, enter a state of loving kindness as the day starts. And then I go through the morning and I'm working and then I have lunch and all this sorts of stuff. So I've been trying in the afternoon to take a little bit of time to like calm down and like spend some time in contemplation. And in order to do that, I've been trying to drink tea in the afternoons. Okay. And specifically, I've been trying to do Gong Fu tea ceremonies. Are you familiar with Gong Fu tea ceremonies at all?
No, not a lot. I have a little bit, so I kind of know what you're talking about. I can see in my head a sort of visual of
sure. You've seen them pouring all over and spilling and collecting in the tea tray and all that sort of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so I had been thinking for a couple of months that I wanted to like put together a Gong Fu set so I could start being a little more intentional with my afternoon tea and like take the time to just like sit there and like think about things and meditate a little bit. And when we were up at House on the Rock last month, when we were driving back home, we saw a sign for like, hey, take this exit and drive a bit down the road and you can go to an antiques mall. And we were like, okay, antiques malls are fun. So we went to the antique mall and I found this beautiful picture that's like Chinese porcelain, hand painted, clearly like a vintage piece. Okay. And they wanted like no money for it. So I was like, great, this is my chance. I'm going to start building a Gong Fu set and this will be like the picture for it. So then, you know, you start looking other places, you get on Etsy and you order a bunch of stuff from other countries and eventually it shows up and it takes a few weeks to get there because shipping is a mess. But at this point, I've got like a beautiful little set. I'll have to send you a picture later. Yeah. But, you know, I've got my pitcher, my fairness cup. I've got, you know, cute little teacups. And I also have a cute little teapet. And for those who don't know, teapets are basically, one of the things with Gong Fu is that Gong Fu tea ceremonies is that you don't drink the first brew. And this is apparently a thing in most Chinese tea. You brew it quicker than we do in American and British tea. Okay. You like, usually when people brew tea, they like put a tea bag in the tea or in the mug for like 4 to 5 minutes, right? Like that's kind of how you brew tea.
Sure.
With Chinese preparation of tea, they're like, nah, that's way too long. That's why people don't like tea, because it's too bitter, because you let it steep too long. And so you do a lot shorter steeping times. And one of the things that you do is you always pour out the first steep, because then a lot of the harshest caffeine is gone. And so
Okay.
you still get some of the caffeine, but not like the biggest caffeine boost. And it just tastes better after the first brew. And so one of the things traditionally that you do is you have a little teapet, some sort of clay figurine that you will pour some of that first brew onto, and they're just kind of like your companion as you are making tea and enjoying your time. So I have this very cute little teapet that is a little fox that's like a dark gray. And when you pour hot water on her, she color changes. So instead of being like a
Nice.
dark gray, she becomes white with like a rainbow tail and rainbow like points on her ears. And so it's like it's just a fun little set that I've put together, and it doesn't work every day. Like not every day do I remember to do it or have time to do it, or even the druthers. Some days it's like, I don't feel like dealing with that right now. Cause like, it's more involved. It takes some time, but like I have found a lot of comfort when I take the time to sit down and brew some tea and drink it slowly and just kind of think about things, or maybe I'll read a book for a little bit while I do it. And just kind of savor some quiet and some calm in my afternoons, and that has been really nice when I do it.
Nice.
And that's kind of what I've been up to.
Very good.
Wishing I was getting more excited about pop culture stuff and failing miserably at that.
Yeah, I get that. Well, I'll be honest, I don't have a ton to add. I will say, music-wise, it's been a little weak lately. Pelican, I know we've mentioned Pelican in passing. They had a new album drop. It's been quite some time since they had an album drop, and it's fine. It's Pelican, but at the same time, I realize there's something about Pelican's music that just doesn't interest me or excite me in the way it used to. And this was incredibly stark, this difference, when I saw Russian Circles a couple months ago, because Pelican opened. And so it was Pelican and then straight into Russian Circles. And I think the biggest difference,
that's a rough act to follow, you man.
Yeah. And
that doesn't do Pelican any favors, because Pelican has always kind of felt like bargain basement Russian Circles to begin with. And so then to see them back to back, you're like, oh, Pelican, you ain't got the juice like Russian Circles does.
Not even close. And part of it is they don't play with dynamics nearly as much as Russian Circles does. But even then, even on this Russian Circles songs that are, straightforward, more heavy and aggressive the whole way, there's just something missing. And so I listened to it once or twice just to give it a fair shake and kind of went, eh. The only other one that I do want to mention, because I think, I don't know, I think you may find this a little interesting, and it's funny because it was released by 20 Buck Spin. So 20 Buck Spin is a record label, kind of an indie record label. And this is, they have a lot of good stuff. I think, at least in the metal world, there are a few record labels where you kind of go, I'm going to be interested in what comes out under their label, because they tend to sign really interesting bands. And 20 Buck Spin is one of those where even if I don't, even if I'm not going to listen to it, I will pay attention when I see that a new release from them. Willowtip is another one. Willowtip is another label where, again, I'm always a little intrigued at something. And if Willowtip has signed a band, I'll at least listen to it. So this one, the band is called Bleed. The album is called Bleed. It's their debut LP, and it's not even really an LP. It's like 30 something minutes, so it's closer to an EP, but they called it an LP. Sure. And here's what I'll say. I started playing it. It is much more like a late 90s, early eras, like alt rock kind of album than I would expect, again, from the label. It's got some record scratches. It's got, like, I started listening to this album and finished listening to it and instantly had to go and listen to Make Yourself by Incubus, because it was that vibe. Like, it was such a strong vibe from that era that it's been fun to listen to. It's not an amazing album. It's not going to knock it, but for those of us who have some affection for that era. I mean, again, it very much was like make yourself hybrid theory, Linkin Park, like that era just like zoom shot me back there. And so that was kind of fun. And I think you should check it out. I think you might find it entertaining. Again, it's not something I'm listening to a lot, but every once in a while I put it on and the nostalgia hits hard.
Sometimes that's good. Sometimes the nostalgia hit is satisfying experience.
Yes, and this definitely was. Haven't been really reading a whole lot of more, shall we say, fiction stuff right now. I finished a book called Space at the Speed of Light, written by, I think it's Becky Smethurst. She's an astrophysicist, I think from the UK. And it was just kind of a brief book of big concept things about astrophysics and stuff. I don't know. I was like, this should be interesting. And it was well written and it was a pretty quick and breezy read. I'm now reading her one of her other books. I think it's titled A Brief History of Black Holes. Again, just I was interested. Aubrey has her degree in astrophysics and has been doing studying on black holes. And so I was like, cool, let me learn more about this. And that's been fun. Reading a couple other nonfiction books, but haven't really made much more move on Wind and Truth, which, I need to do something about that and I need to work through that, but that's okay. And then I'm the same as you in terms of games, haven't really gotten into anything. There was a recent Humble Bundle that was a bunch of like bullet hell / bullet heaven type games. Some of them are a little more twin stick shooter. I went ahead and bought it and installed a bunch of them, and I've fired up a number of them and just to see what they're like. And I mean, they're exactly what it says on the box. It's nothing so far has blown me away. And I look at it and I'm like, those will be fun. I'll make sure that I have those on my Steam Deck or something because they'll be fun to easy to play for, 10 minutes here and there. I have played a little bit of Balatro on the PC as well as on mobile. That's one of those games that I like it a lot because it's fairly easy to dip in and out. But at the same time, once I dip in, there is a drive to just keep playing because that's a really, really well made game. And I think that they did a great job with it. The final thing I will mention is did you notice, and I don't know if you saw this, Eden, but patch 1.4 for Avowed dropped recently. It might have been this week, maybe it was last week. And there are enough things in there, honestly, that has me going, do I want to play Avowed again? I think I might want to play Avowed again. So I'll give you a quick overview of what some of the things that they've done that I think just look like enough little quality of life type improvements that make me go, I had a ton of fun with that game and maybe I want to play it some more. So first of all, I will say there is what's called an arachnophobia mode. If you have an issue with the spiders, and there are a lot of spiders, it will replace all the spiders with little spheres that have swords. So little colorful spheres that have swords if you don't like spiders. So that I thought was actually kind of cool of the team to go, hey, yeah, let's do something for people who have this fear. But again, some of the quality of life things. So one of the annoying aspects of Avowed, and this is particularly, for a completionist, like I know I am, and I think you and I share that, a bit of that. When you have explored all of the accessible areas on a map, the fog of war for the entire map will clear. So you will know that you don't need to go and try and figure out how the heck do I get over to this place.
Well, that would be nice.
And also when you enter a city on an overland map, the corresponding section will now be revealed because that kept driving me crazy when I would look at the map and it had like the richer part of Paradise still grayed in. And I'm like, but I've been there. The radius for clearing the fog while exploring is actually increased. So it will uncover more of the map as you move. There is critters that you encounter can actually now be killed and have a chance to drop loot. So you can get loot from critters. I have read on Reddit that the amount of gold and materials, crafting materials that drop is significantly higher now. And so it's a lot easier to upgrade things. You can do that more quickly because You'll get a lot more crafting materials. Um, you can, this is a good one. Soul pods will now dispel an illusion instead of having to have Yahtzee in your party. The
Oh, that's nice.
only one that Yahtzee has to be there for is Ringrim's entrance, which, story-wise makes sense why she's there. But that was one thing where I just kept Yahtzee in my party all the time after I picked her up because, well, what if there were those illusions and there was no way for me to dispel them? Whereas all the others, I could take care of with abilities or grenades or whatever I had. So, although I do want to say,
I just had Yahtzee in the party the whole time because she was a sassy old sexy grandma.
Not only is she a sassy old sexy grandma, she's horny as hell. And it was hilarious.
I think she's so funny. I think she was so great. When she showed up, I was like, oh, she's never leaving the squad.
No, and I enjoyed having her around too. I was telling Gareth because he kind of dropped off it a little bit and he hasn't picked her up yet. And I told him, I said, dude, it's hilarious because her explanations as she's running around, that involve the deities in there and anatomical parts like Andra's titties and Bareth's balls and Galwain's gonads when she's getting excited or agitated. They made me laugh every time she said them.
Oh, she's very funny.
But, still, it would be nice if you want to have the option of dispelling the illusions. But get this, you can actually now, there's an optional setting to display chests on the minimap. And,
buddy.
And they have again done more with the loot to make it so that now smaller loot things like bags and backpacks can actually have larger loot in them, including armor and stuff like that. So again, just a lot of little ways to make the progression in the game, it sounds like, if you want it, a little bit more fun and even quicker and help you kind of power up in a way that that makes it sound to me like I just sat there looking at it going, maybe I want to play Avowed. And, instead of do pure magic, let me play around with stuff again and go through and try different weapons because it was a good game, like we talked about.
It was a good game. That is interesting. I don't know. Maybe I would go back to it. I think I need a little more space from it, but I did really like it.
Well, anything else?
Like anything else is grabbing my attention, so I guess I'll do that.
I know. I keep telling myself I need to install Indiana Jones, that game, so that I can at least run around and punch Nazis in the face. I just haven't done that yet. So
I really like that game. Have I gone back to it? No.
Yeah, I get it. But speaking of games, let's move on to our main topic for the day. And we're going to, again, kind of as if it were a movie, we are going to kind of let's hit some high level overviews and then there's going to be spoilers afterwards. But I don't feel too terrible because, I mean, this game did come out on PC in 2017, I think is when it came out. Yeah,
this game's been out for almost a decade at this point, so no guilt.
But that game is, we played or replayed in some cases, the game What Remains of Edith Finch. And the genesis from this came from a couple of weeks ago when we were recording, or before we had recorded, I think it was, I started thinking about, well, what could we do next time? And I knew that things, we're getting into the summer, things can get a little busier with everything going on. I knew we were going to have some family here. And so my time was going to be a little bit more limited. And I thought to myself, well, what would be an interesting game that has kind of a strong narrative bend to it, that we could go through in a relatively short amount of time. And so I actually used, I think it was probably ChatGPT or something, and I threw that question out. I said, this is what I'm looking for, and it gave some suggestions. And it was kind of funny. What Remains from Edith Finch came up, and I did this actually in a few of the different AI chat things because sometimes I just like to, want to compare and get some additional sort of input. What Remains of Edith Finch came up in every one of these. I was convinced that I have this game. And it turns out that I both did and didn't at the same time. How does that happen? Well, it turns out that I was looking in my Steam library. I was convinced it was there. It was not. And so I then found it on sale on the Humble store for like $5. Got it. Added it to my Steam library. And then while you and I were discussing this after we finished recording, I then realized, oh, I did have it. It was in my GOG library. But sadly, because of, in particular, the Steam Deck, I really just pay attention to what's in my Steam library now. So anyway.
Yeah, unfortunately, the I have a lot of games on my GOG library that functionally doesn't exist unless I really think about it.
Yeah.
It's weird. It's weird how much Steam has just captured the entire ecosystem. And I'm not saying that in a negative way. I'm just saying it in a fact of life type of way.
And I find it a little sad because I don't want there to be something that is such a monopoly. But for me, really, it boils down to the handheld devices where it is just easier to do it through Steam, even if they run Windows, where you can put GOG on there and everything. But Steam is, because of the Steam Deck, they have designed Steam to work much better, being controlled, navigated, and everything with basically a controller, rather than having to sit there with a stylus, because my fingers, they do not do well tapping normal full Windows 11 touch, interface targets on a 7 to 8 inch screen. That's just not designed for that. And so being able to navigate with the controller and interact and everything there that's where Steam really shines, and nobody else thus far. And it's interesting to me because, GOG has GOG Galaxy, but they don't have any, that I'm aware of. There's nothing in GOG Galaxy to enable, basically steal from Steam and do like that big picture mode where it's hey, we're going to make an interface that is completely navigable with your controls in such a way that it is console-esque, as if you were, sitting at your TV and you don't have a mouse and a keyboard and you're driving this thing from a controller in your hands. And I think that that's a big missed opportunity, because since that isn't there, I just don't think about them anymore.
Yep.
Anyway, that's a bit of an aside. But so we played What Remains of Edith Finch, and I know you mentioned that you had played this before, Eden, but what were your thoughts on getting back into this?
I had actually not played it before. I mixed it up with Dear Esther.
Okay.
Which, very similar vibes, but a very different game. So I realized that when I booted it up, I was like, oh, this isn't what I thought it was. And that's when I realized, oh, that's because I was thinking of Dear Esther, which is a different thing.
Which was one of the options. It was the ones that I was convinced I had in my Steam library. It was both Dear Esther and it's the Vanishing of Edith Finch. Vanishing of Ethan Carter.
Vanishing of Ethan Carter. Sure.
Was the other one I was thinking of, because similar titles, whatever. So okay, well then why don't you give us sort of what was the experience? What were your thoughts on playing Edith Finch?
I think it's an interesting game. I think that it suffers from a lot of the problems that come with all of the quote unquote walking simulator type games. In that they're not very fun from a ludic perspective, but they do often tell interesting stories. So then it becomes a question of, does the story win out over the fact that there's not actually much game in this game? Which, I will fully admit, kind of makes me sound like an asshole when I say that, because there is a very large contingent of assholes who are like, walking simulators aren't real games because that's not hardcore. It doesn't have any mechanics. And it's like, yeah, no, it doesn't. But that's because they're using this as a vessel for storytelling.
Sure.
And to lesser or greater effect, I think some of them are better than others. Absolutely. I think some of them, one thing I do think is true of almost all of them, and I do think Edith Finch suffers from a little bit, is that they are often overwrought and treacly. They're trying so hard to get an emotional response across through the aesthetic that it feels like it is about as subtle as the anvil falling on Wile E. Coyote's head.
You're not wrong.
And that's video games. Tell me a video game that is able to induce aesthetic emotional response that isn't hitting you over the head. Because all of the games that people are like, oh, this is so emotional, it made me feel so many things. I'm like, yeah, that's because they took out a 10-pound mallet and beat you in the face with it for 15 minutes. Yeah,
it's true.
That's why. True. Like, that's just video games. And that is a thing that I think as video games, progress as a medium, I think that will become less of a problem. If we look at other media, that is exactly what has happened. Like a lot of books, and this remains true to this day. There's still plenty of books that feel like they're hitting you over the head with a brick, but like subtlety and insinuation and those sorts of things had to come to books over the course of decades of creations. That is also true of cinema. Like early cinema feels kind of stilted and like messy to us, stolid, because it's so like everything is wearing its heart on its sleeve. Everything is overwrought, over-explained. And then as cinema matured, they arrived at a point where it wasn't like that anymore. So I fully expect video games to reach that point, and I think in some degrees they have. Like I would imagine you have not, because it's pretty long, and I think we would have talked about it. You've probably never played Disco Elysium, right?
I have started Disco Elysium, and then I did not finish it. I fully intend to play Disco Elysium at some point, but yeah. So I have not played it, but I'm a little aware of it.
It's really cool. It is a lot more subtle and dealing with bigger in dealing with the bigger topics that it deals with, and I think a lot of other games are. But it still kind of feels heavy-handed sometimes. But it is showing that I think there's progress being made. However, there is a fundamental difference between film, books, and video games in that I think it is harder to have that subtlety in a video game because of the way that you interact with a video game versus the way you interact with a book or a movie.
Sure.
Because it has to have some sort of gameplay mechanics. There have to be verbs with which you are interacting with the thing. Otherwise, you're just watching a movie. And that needing to be embodied somehow, needing to react somehow is it means that it's hard, I think, to approach more nuanced, subtle storytelling. I don't know. But again, all this to say, I think Edith Finch is pretty good. And there are some parts of it that I think are really stellar, and some parts of it I think are really messy. And I don't know that I loved it, but I did like a lot of it. How did you feel about it?
I think similar to you. I think I might have been a little bit higher on it than you were. I definitely agree with everything you said about sort of the heavy-handedness that is often in storytelling in video games. And so going into it knowing and sort of expecting that aspect of it, it wasn't like it didn't bother me that there were definitely parts that felt like that. And so I found it a fairly affecting game, enough that when it was done and it ended and the credits started rolling, I just kind of sat there and sat in it for a few minutes and enjoyed the experience. So I thought it was an interesting story to a degree. Again, it's not a very deep story. Basically, it is the story of a family, the Finch family, who came to, I think was it off the coast of like the Pacific Northwest? Or was it somewhere in New England?
It felt like the Pacific Northwest, but they floated a house across the ocean.
So I got to think it must have been like Maine.
Maine.
Yes.
Yeah. But the vibes were Pacific Northwest, not necessarily Maine vibes, but like.
Agreed. Anyway.
It feels like it should be in Maine.
They came across and it's just tragedy. It's tragedy after tragedy. Every member of the family, for the most part, had died in some tragic way. And really the whole game is Edith Finch, the youngest, the last line in this family tree, going back to the family's home on Orcas Island and going through the home, which had in large part been locked away by her mother. And as she moves through these different rooms and navigates through this house, you get little moments where basically it's a brief little vignette about what happened to one of these ancestors to die. And you get kind of little, this is where I think it was interesting and sometimes successful. And as you said, sometimes not as successful. But each one of these, so when you are Edith, you're literally just navigating around the house. And sometimes you have to find secret passages, which there's little white symbols on there. It makes it very easy. You don't have to do any work for this.
It ain't hard to find this stuff.
Correct. But then once you get to one of these, it will then go into this sort of flashback, and the gameplay, air quotes around gameplay, because it still isn't much of a game, but it's often different for each one of these. It's told in a different way. And we'll get into that when we get into kind of spoiler territory, I think, which ones worked and which ones didn't work for us. But at the end, then it's kind of she is journaling this, chronicling this, and you end up with, okay, and so kind of there's the end of the story. This is where things get to now. And again, I enjoyed it. It didn't take too long. So it was, I think, lengthwise, it felt
in its favor.
Yes. Lengthwise, it felt just about right for me. There was one part where, because of the way the dialogue goes, it felt like it was wrapping up. It felt like it was coming to some sort of getting ready for the denouement. But I was like, the tree's only like halfway filled out. So clearly this isn't the end. And at that point, I was looking for a little more. And then honestly, when it got to the end, I was like, good, this is it. I am ready to be done. So, well, any other big thoughts before we go ahead and just kind of dive into more spoilery things?
Not really anything I can think of. I will say, in terms of like, again, the term walking simulator, this one is interesting in that it does do more, I think, with the conceit than many of them do. Dear Esther, you're literally just walking around. Everybody's Gone to the Rapture, you're literally just walking around. I really like Gone Home, but you are just walking around. I do think, for all that I like Gone Home, I do think that Fulbright's next game, Tacoma, is by bounds and large margins much, much better, because it is trying to stretch outside of the walking sim and is more than just a walking sim. And I think that is to its credit. And I think that to a certain degree, that is sort of what Edith Finch is doing too, is that it's pushing on those constraints. It's pushing on those confines. Not quite to the extent, like the wacky extent that like a Stanley Parable does.
Sure.
But I do think it did some interesting stuff. But yeah, anything else I have to say, I can say for the spoiler section.
Well, then we're going to go ahead and jump into the spoiler section. So go for it.
Dog, what a bummer. What a colossal bummer of an ending.
Yeah. I agree.
Jesus Christ.
Yeah. You're not wrong.
Anyway,
So Edith dies. Edith dies.
Edith gets got giving birth, and you're like, are you kidding me right now, game?
Yeah. So it starts out.
Twist the knife one last time?
It starts out, and we see somebody holding this journal on a ferry going to Orcas Island, and you think that that's Edith. And at the end, you realize, oh no, that was actually her child, who now...
Most of the time it was Edith.
No.
You can tell because she's wearing different gloves.
Correct.
Oh, but the very, very beginning.
The very, very
beginning, it is the different glove. You're right. Yes, you're right.
That's the thing. It took me a little bit to catch on to that. But the very, very beginning, on the ferry looking at the book, it's her child. And then it's Edith for most of the game. And then at the end, it kind of backs out. And there is her child closing that journal and putting some flowers on the grave in the family cemetery, because this family is cursed just enough that at one point, as Edith points out, this is a family who completed their own cemetery before they'd actually finished building their house because they needed the cemetery. So yeah.
And maybe wouldn't have gone back, little guy. I maybe would have been like, would have loved you, Mom, I think, ? I'm not going to go back to the house where you all fucking got because I don't want to get got.
Exactly.
I don't want to get got.
It's kind of like, no, maybe this curse is real. Maybe there's really something going on with this here. But yeah, so what else? What other spoilery things?
As you mentioned, each little vignette, and I'm not gonna lie, I didn't get all of them. By the time I hit credits, I opened up the family tree. There was at least one person whose story I missed entirely.
Oh,
and
really?
It was because maybe it was hidden somewhere, but there was one that it never took me to.
Do you remember who it was?
Right past it. I don't off the top of my head. I would have to pop open the game again. But yeah, there was at least here. Let me wake up, little keyboard. Edith Finch family tree.
Because I know that there were some leaves. There were a couple leaves, and those were like spouses. And those I don't think there were any stories for.
I don't think I ever got one for Gus. I don't remember a kid with a mohawk.
Oh, okay. Interesting.
Yeah, I don't think I ever got one for Gus. That's the one who I see is missing.
Okay. All right.
So I don't know where his story was, but...
So I'm going to tell you really quick because his story was kind of interesting. Gus's dad, and I'm trying to remember, Gus was the son of... Gus
was one of Edith's mom's siblings.
Yes. And so...
Because there were the three siblings. There was Edith's mom, there was kid who drowned as a baby,
yep,
and then there was Gus.
So Gus was... it's an interesting one where Gus is basically just on the beach flying a kite. And it's a poem that Dawn, his sister, wrote for him. And so it's in that little room where you've got the first bed, which was, I think the three like beds lined up next to each other. Was it in that room? Yes, it was one of those, and it was a little scroll. Then you stop there, and Edith reads the poem, and then you're basically, as the poem is being read, Gus is outside flying a kite. A stanza of the poem will appear in the sky, and then you have to fly the kite through it, and it knocks the letters away, and then another one will come up. But basically, Gus's father is getting remarried, and he refuses to participate. A storm picks up. The family goes into the tent. Gus stays out there. They come out after the storm's passed and find Gus's dead body.
Jeez. Well, like we said, oops, all bummers. Bummers tip to toe here.
It's true.
I missed that one. I missed that one entirely. That is so funny to me. And I didn't notice it until I saw the credits and I saw there was a couple things that weren't filled out. And I was like, okay, I guess I missed one. I'm not going to go back and play it. I'm going to just let this be the story that I got. But that's really interesting to me.
Yeah, that is interesting.
What did you think of the different stories? Because like I was saying, these different stories have different gameplay, and sometimes I felt like it worked, and sometimes I felt like it was kind of a mess. Like, for example, Molly, when you become the cat, there was one particular spot, and
this is the first one.
It's the first one. There was one particular spot where you're out on like the treehousey part, and you have to jump up on the table. Because this is an indie game with dog shit physics, I could not get the cat to jump up on the chair so I could jump. It took me legitimately 5 or 6 minutes just like trying to jump to get on and then trying to figure out if it was a different way to go. And then I finally got up on the table and then I had to keep jumping. And I was just like, I don't know about this one, guys.
Yeah. And it's interesting that that's the first one because I actually think that was one of the least effective ones. Like,
I think so too. I thought it was you see how they were trying to be like, see, we're not just a walking sim. You're a cat. And it's like, okay, yeah, I'm also a cat in Little Kitty Big City and I can do stuff and I can't do stuff in this game.
But you're not just a cat. You're a cat. And then you're a shark. And then
you become a shark rolling down the hill and you become a weird tentacle monster that's eating people on a boat.
Yeah.
And then you kill yourself. I don't know, man. What a mess. What a mess of a game. Yeah, that one was a mess. I do think in terms of aesthetic, I thought Barbara's was interesting.
Yes.
The way that it told Barbara's story. Because, so Barbara is like this. She was like a kid starlet who has now become a teen and is no longer in the movies anymore. She had a famous scream as a child star. And then this is a retelling question mark of what happened, question mark, question mark, question mark, through like an EC Comics style story where there's like a evil pumpkin head man who's kind of like the crypt keeper who's telling you the story of how the hook man killed Barbara. And so it like jumps from panel to panel, and then some of the panels become embodied things that you have to walk through or interact with in that first person perspective again. I thought Barbara's was an interesting way to tell it.
Interestingly, was the one place where I found it, where I ran into a bug and I actually had to exit the game and restart it. When you go downstairs to the fridge, you have to keep moving. I stopped moving when it was like, the fridge did something. And then it wouldn't let me move any further. I couldn't move.
Oh, that's interesting.
And I looked online, and in the Steam forum for this, it was like, bug still here in 2022, bug still here 2023, bug still here 2025. Fortunately, that one wasn't very long. There's another bug that I saw people reporting in one of the games where I was like, oh, I'd be pissed if that one got me, because this one, it was like, I can't remember. I think it might have been in the cannery one.
Oh, if it was late in the, that was like one of the longest ones.
Yeah, it was
late in the cannery, I would have been annoyed.
This one, fortunately, I only, like, it went back, I started again, it reloaded, and it was maybe like 3 to 5 minutes to get back there. And I just made sure, like, I went downstairs and I turned to the fridge and I just kept holding W down. I'm like, just keep walking, do not stop. And it worked just fine. But yeah, I thought that one was interesting. Speaking of the cannery one was really interesting. This is one of Edith's brothers, right?
Yeah, it's Edith's older brother.
And so,
well, I guess they were all both older brothers, but Edith's older brother who didn't disappear when he was a kid.
Correct. I think Lewis was this one. Milton is the one who disappeared. So
yeah,
you discover it is a letter from Lewis's psychiatrist, and Lewis is working in a cannery. And so your mechanic for this is you're just with the mouse, you're grabbing a fish, sliding it over, it's getting its head cut off, and then you're throwing it onto like a conveyor belt. And this is starting. And then all of a sudden over on the left of the screen, you get this little, like with the keyboard now with WASD, because I was using a keyboard and mouse, you're going to start moving this little character, and the psychiatrist starts talking about basically his imagination. And he was imagining these other worlds, and they just got bigger and bigger and bigger. And eventually he commits suicide because he's stuck in the real world and he's not in any of these. And that was one where it was interesting because you had to keep doing the fish thing, or at least you had to do it periodically. I just kept doing it constantly with the mouse.
Me too.
I don't know. There are certain places where a fish is blocking your the little isometric view character. And once you chop the head off, then the fish in that little thing gets cut in half, and the obstruction goes away. So I don't know if you could just ignore the fish until you hit one of those. I just kept doing it the whole time. But that was interesting because, again, you've got the comic book thing with Barbara's story. You've got this one where it's almost like this little isometric, and it's a different art style as it's going on. And there were a couple choices, again, air quotes around the word choice, as this boat is floating down the hill, or down the ocean, you can kind of pick different paths. So it's like, and then he met it was either like a handsome queen or a beautiful prince, and you could pick those. And then it was like, again, there were one or two other little paths that you could take that slightly influenced the story. I'm sure it didn't make a huge difference, but influenced it a little bit. And so I thought that was one of the more interesting ones. And I'm glad because, as you mentioned earlier, it was one of the longer ones.
Yeah. I did think it was interesting that did seem to be the only one where you, as the player, made some sort of role playing choice, like you said, where like you basically defined what was your brother's orientation, like sexual orientation. Is he attracted to women or men? Because who is he imagining as his idealized like partner that he is questing to find, and all this sorts of stuff, which I thought was interesting. But it did make me think, well, I just would have loved to have heard from the developers, how come that was choice-based, and when so many of the other things that happen in the game aren't choice-based, what was the rationale between making that choice-based? Yeah. I would be curious about that, and whether it was a case of like, oh, we didn't want to like, I don't know, was it like a censorship thing where they were like, canonically in our brain, in our version of things, Lewis is gay, but we wanted it to be able to be sold in any country, so we needed to make this like an optional choice, or like, I don't know. I'm just curious as to like, why did they make that particular one the one that you could interact with in that way, whereas none of the others are that way?
Yeah, that's a really interesting point, and it would be fascinating to kind of know what was the impetus behind that. So.
Because I don't think it's a poor choice. I think it's a fine choice. I just am curious as to what the rationale was.
Yeah. What else? What are there other ones in particular that did not work for you?
I mostly felt bad for the brother in the basement.
Yeah.
Like that, or the uncle, your mom's uncle, who lived in the basement for 50 years and then decided to leave one day and got hit by a train. And I'm like, man, this curse is for reals. Like, these people, and again, it's one of those things where it's like, Edith, sell it. Don't go back. Sell it. And little boy, child of Edith, do not go to this island. You will get infected with the curse.
Yeah.
Change your last name. Run away. Don't be a Finch.
Yep. Another one that I thought was interesting was Sam. Dawn's dad. Dawn is Edith's mother.
Sure.
Sam was then again Edith's grandfather. And that one was interesting. It was an interesting mechanic that did not fully work for me. So in this one, you go out and Sam is taking Dawn to go deer hunting, and you've got a camera and you've got to be taking pictures, and you kind of have to just take random pictures, but then also you got to be taking pictures of the right things to progress the story. And that one was a little tedious because there was the end where you needed to take the picture of the buck who was way off in the distance over on the side. And the way this mechanic works is that everything's out of focus if it's not the right distance. And then you can zoom in and out to get something to come into focus. But so you're looking around through the camera and you just see blobs without zooming in or zooming back out. And I thought it was interesting. That was one of the ones that was, again, just because it felt like you just had to spam the camera to some degree. That one didn't quite work as well for me. Again, interesting tragedy in that they see a buck, they go over, and now Sam is, taking a picture of Dawn before she shoots the buck. Dawn shoots the buck. She doesn't want to shoot the buck. She's not excited about this. Sam kind of pushes her into it. Then he goes over, he sets up the camera. The buck is dead on the top of this little rise. Dawn is over there by it. Then you click to set the timer on the camera, then you got to walk Sam up there. And as he gets up there, Dawn says, oh, he's still moving a little bit. And Sam's like, oh, that's okay. Picks the head up to take the picture. And the buck jerks its head and knocks him off and kills him. That way, that's how he dies. So it is, but again, that one was one of my least favorite. The other one that was a little annoying for me was, it's not Gus, it was Gregory Finch.
Oh, the baby in the bathtub. That one sucked.
Yeah, the baby in the bathtub. That one was done because you just had to take the frog and keep jumping higher and higher and figure out that you had to jump higher to knock more stuff into the tub. And eventually, but again, great. We've got a baby who mom leaves in the tub because she's on the phone arguing with X, and doesn't want the baby to hear them arguing, so leaves the room while baby's in the tub and baby drowns.
Yeah, it's just bummers all around.
It's like oops, all bummers right here.
All bummers.
But like I say, And I think my final thoughts on this were, number one, I think it was just about the right length. I think they actually did a pretty good job at nailing the length. It was long enough that it felt like you'd kind of watched a movie or something. It wasn't too short, but it didn't quite get to the point that I was done with it. I was close. Like, I think had there honestly been one more person's story to go find, I think that would have been too much for me. But this felt just about right. I thought that it was an interesting game visually because you've got kind of a very, I mean, the house itself is sort of wacky, and every room is different in how it's decorated to sort of reflect the personality of the person whose room it was. And so you get some visual variation there, but where it really kind of shines, and I think does a good job, is the visuals of many of the different stories are kind of unique. Again, Barbara's feels more like comic booky. You get that 3D isometric perspective for Lewis. And so I liked that there was a little bit of visual variety as well as that gameplay variety, even though some of them didn't work as well as I think they wanted to. But I thought it was an interesting game. I don't think that it was, I went and I looked and it was getting 9s and 10s and up for all these Game of the Year awards and that sort of thing. And maybe in 2017, I would have been like, oh my gosh, in 2025, I feel like we've seen enough of these kinds of things that I don't think it was, like, I certainly wouldn't give it a 9 out of 10 or a 5 out of 5. This was, for me, this is like a 3.5 out of 5 kind of experience.
Yeah. No, I 100% agree with that. But as we have discussed multiple times, I think video game reviewers are too kind to most video games. Because they given shit 9s and 10s that deserve maybe a 6.
Well, they used to always.
I think this is a solid GameSpot 7.
Yeah, I agree.
Although GameSpot did give it a 9, but this is a GameSpot 7 to me.
Well, and again, for many years, and especially back then, I know that I think it was on like the Giant Bombcast and stuff when they were still doing that. Maybe they still are. But people, they would talk about the 7 to 9 scale, and there was a time where a 7 out of 10 meant that game was a real, like, if you knew and you saw a game was given a 7 out of 10, you're like, oh, this is a real dumpster fire of a game.
It's a stinker. Stay away. It's a stinker.
So yeah, I agree.
Related to that, this is a short thing I'll mention here at the end. So I listen to a lot of podcasts from the Abnormal Mapping Network, and one of their podcasts is called VoIP Life. I don't know if I've mentioned it here or not. It's one of my favorite podcasts. But it is one of their premium podcasts. You have to be on their social media or on their Patreon to get. And it is very funny to me because it is the most my parent, and at this point, my parasocial relationship is sort of social because I know both of the hosts and am in their Discord and interact with them relatively frequently. And
sure.
I follow them and they follow me on social media. So it's almost a social, not quite only parasocial relationship, but still this podcast is the best parasocial relationship I've ever had. Cause that's just these two people just chewing the fat, shooting the shit. And one episode, what they did is because the Giant Bob folks had broken down, here is exactly how, these are the parameters to give scores to things at GameSpot. This is how much weight audio gets. This is how much weight graphics get. Here's what the reviewer's tilt does and all this sorts of stuff. So as a shitpost, they put together, not a shitpost, it was a joke of an episode. They put together an Excel spreadsheet so that they could rate all of the games that they had played for the Game Club podcast Abnormal Mapping, and to give them ratings per the old late 90s, early 2000s GameSpot rating. And again, like you said, a lot of stinkers were seriously elevated by just being it's a good looking game, even if it sucks.
Yeah.
And a lot of really incredible games really had their scores brought down because, it doesn't look great, but I want to give that reviewer's tilt a 10, and the reviewer's tilt isn't worth that much. And so it was very funny to watch this narrowing of the window of what a game could get, and it really did come down to about like a 7 to an 8.5 was just about every single game. Yeah. Whether objectively, I would say, well, that's Doom. Doom is a 10 out of 10. It's the greatest video game ever made. Or, boy, that's a stinker. I'd give it a 4. Once you start putting in the GameSpot scales, then it becomes a 7.
Interesting. That's really interesting.
But anyway, I liked it. I'm glad we played it. I do think it's interesting that the walking sim is essentially a dead genre. This was the last big one to come out that I can think of. Maybe Firewatch was Firewatch. No, Firewatch was before that.
Yeah.
So this is it. This was the death knell of the walking simulator as a genre, it feels like. And I think that's interesting.
They got really big for a little bit, you know? It was
the thing for an indie studio to do. And like, I think that a lot of the ideas and storytelling concepts are still there in indie games. You know, I very famously last year talked a lot about how I thought 1000 Times Resist was such a cool game, and dealt with really heady, really big ideas. And in 2017, that would have been a walking sim game. But in 2024, that was a game where it was in third person perspective because you needed to see your character and your character needed to be embodied in a different way. And there was gameplay elements. There was portions where you needed to like teleport from place to place, or there was a reason why you needed to walk around this large space to find these different things. And that is kind of where I feel like the indie game has gone, where they're like, we need more verbs. We need more ludic experience in these games while still trying to tell these like heady, intimate stories that we want to tell. And it really feels like Edith Finch is that kind of cuspy thing where they're like, it does have some gameplay elements. It does have things that are not just walking around and clicking on audio logs.
Yeah.
But it is still walking around clicking on audio logs fundamentally at the end of the day.
Yeah, I agree. Well, we'll go ahead then and wrap it up now, and be back in another couple of weeks. Obviously, this is coming out just about a day late just because of the holiday and some other things. We're getting it out just a little bit late, but we'll be back in another couple of weeks. And until then, if you've got any feedback to share, please reach out, feedback@themiddleofculture.com, and we'll talk to you then.
See you then. Bye.